Hello, everyone. This is our group's presentation on classism in education. Now, first, we have to define some terms that are essential to understanding not only what classism is, but the main ideas that comprise classism. First and foremost, that is the definition of classism, which is a prejudice against or in favor of people belonging to a particular social class. Now we have a little diagram to the right that shows the social classes in America based on profession and annual income. Now let's just have that idea in your head when we go through the next few terms. Now these next few terms are important to understanding the makeup of classism just as it is and what we're going to be talking about through the rest of this presentation. Now first we have the social class, which is defined as a division of a society based on social and economic status. Next, wealth distribution, which is the way in which the wealth and income of a nation are divided among its population. Then you also need to understand equality and equity. Equality is the state of being equal, especially in status, rights, and opportunities. And equity is the quality of being fair and impartial. Now, this diagram here to the right shows the class system in America, which, as you can see, has 5 distinct levels. These levels they can be kind of interchangeable. They're kind of fluid, but these are mainly the ones that are agreed upon. But the thing about classism is that they are distinct social classes, and they are, as you can very clearly see, decided by income. So now that you know the key terms and the general idea of classism, we can start talking about the history.
So for the history of classism, in early American history, typically land was given to the wealthy and it was withheld from the poor. So this sort of was like when the discrepancy started, because if you were already wealthy and had power, you were given more land, so basically more wealth. And then the poor people were not given anything. So they stayed at the same spot while the wealthy people got higher up. Also, the wealthy people typically were sent to universities to better themselves and get an education. Meanwhile, the poor people were the ones actually working on the land. So they never really had a chance to get an education because they were always busy working, and they couldn't really do both. This was most notable in the Civil War and Industrial Revolution, because during these times, a lot of the factory workers were all the poor classes, and they were working all the time, and their working conditions weren't safe, and they really didn't have any other option but to work. Meanwhile, the higher classes, like the people who actually own the factories and all that, they were making loads of money off the workers, and their businesses were growing faster than ever before. This is sort of like the boom or bust cycle, where the higher class would go up significantly while the lower class would stay at the same point. Now that we know about the history of classism, we can talk about it in today's society.
Classism in today's society can be seen in 2 different forms: the economic form of classism and that effect on education, as well as the social aspect and the mental, emotional aspect. So the biggest part of classism in education today is the fact that students in lower wealthy communities can't receive the same resources that students in higher and wealthy class can receive. So right now there's an increase in the tuition rates, and according to FinAid, they are inflating about 8%, which will mean that they will double in the span of 12 years. And solely the fact that students in lower and less economically stable communities don't have as much access to education as those in the higher ones. For example, we can look at resources. First, they don't have as rigorous courses, and it's harder to keep qualified teachers because the payroll is lower. And when we look at technology, it's more expensive to invest in technology and making sure that their school has access to it. For example, if you look at Parks Library, we have a bunch of printers, computers, iPads, and if you compare it to a college without that type of funding and money, they won't have access to those resources. Another big thing is when you look at community college versus Ivy League schools. Obviously, community colleges are less expensive tuition than Ivy League schools, but you're not receiving the same experience and you're receiving two very different educations. It's also very difficult to break that cycle of poverty. And with its effects on mental health, it can start in lower grades such as pre-K through elementary school with ignorance in children and bullying. And it can lead even higher up into having to balance your time between being a part-time student and an employee. And now that we understand its classism's effects in history and in today's society, we can now talk about the steps that we can take to improve classism and its effects on society.
The importance of finding solutions is necessary when approaching any problem, but classism has its own unique set of differences. It's important to note that the problem of classism doesn't necessarily lie between the disparity between social classes, but in the discrepancy of treatment or the discrimination that happens between the classes. An obvious way to dismiss this discrimination would be to remove the social classes, but as taking away money does not seem a viable means, there are some other more viable options to reduce classism and the disparity. One is to encourage the growth in lower classes to reduce that disparity and to make it easier to move between poor and wealthy or even middle class. And another way would be to place less emphasis on material possessions and reaffirm people's innate worth as human beings. Such a way to do this would be to encourage relations between the classes so that wealthy people and poor people and middle class people, of course, would come together and understand each other better. This concludes our presentation on classism. Thank you for listening.